Hello internets! So this video is going to be slightly different from what I normally do, and I'll probably only make content similar to this very rarely because I definitely have absolutely no interest in being a dreaded vlog channel. But I felt like many people would actually find the small life story I'm about to tell fairly interesting, and also because it's fairly relevant to my next breadtuber video that'll be in regards to Adam Something and a certain toxic mindset of creating strawman arguments that he perpetuates, where the left really doesn't understand anything about the right these days. So anyways, if the title of this video didn't give it away, I actually do live nearby the Portland, Oregon greater metro area. Indeed, I do not live in some crazy right-wing echo chamber, I actually live in the exact opposite. But I don't specifically live downtown. I do live close enough that it's within 30 minutes of driving, depending on how bad the traffic is, which is usually pretty bad downtown, especially if you know what I mean by the loop that goes around town. You can easily get stuck for 50 minutes there. So I will admit that I tend to avoid going there unless I absolutely need to for some reason. Now, before I get into this, I should make a disclaimer. I am not part of any political group or movement in Portland. I'm pretty much, in my personal life, totally inactive. I am not a part of Antifa, I am not a part of the Proud Boys, I have no interest in either group. I'm just a bystander who happens to be a right-leaning libertarian who likes to think a lot, and who got to witness the madness of the riot culture firsthand. And to this end, I have a story to tell about that has some level of political importance. My first run-in with this riot culture, as I will call it, was when I was trying to pick up a pizza downtown. I had no idea there was some major protest or riot going on, until of course I saw the cops. The traffic was completely insane, hipsters were running everywhere shouting random virtue signals at the top of their lungs, and it's when I saw a van with police and riot gear all over it that I realized that I probably shouldn't have gone downtown today. It took something like 30 minutes for me to get my pizza, and at that point I was close enough to Broadway Bridge that I just got the heck out of there and just left. I don't think I went back downtown for almost 5 months after that. And from then on, if you read any of the news regarding Portland during 2017 to 2020, the protesting and madness just sort of escalated from there. And I just sort of stopped going downtown as much as I possibly could. Fortunately, things didn't really affect the suburbs and towns around Portland. Places like Wilsonville, Hillsboro, Clackamas, etc. were all pretty much still their normal selves. So I found myself just kind of circling around and avoiding Portland because why should I care and why should I subject myself to the madness? But after watching some of the live streams of the constant protests and riots on Twitch, I decided I should at least go down there once during the madness and hide in the crowd just to see what is really going on, because I noticed that the media in regards to the Portland riots, they weren't exactly being honest. All of them, you could definitely tell when the media is being biased. So I went down there and I decided to talk to random people while of course pretending to be a far-left progressive, which isn't exactly hard to do since wokeism is a painfully simple ideology to emulate. You just really turn off all critical thinking skills and view all issues of social justice through the lens of collectivism, and you're pretty much there. It doesn't really take much brain power to pretend to be one of them. And I certainly did not take my car down there. Definitely do not want to risk having the windows broken in or anything. So I took the Max rail, and immediately when I was taking the Max, I ran into some hipster doing his college homework, and I looked over and talked to him about it, and it was just so sad. It is just pure far-left propaganda being passed off as legitimate academia. Institutional oppression, systematic discrimination, all being taught as if it's gospel truth and not a political opinion, where the data that supports such beliefs can be considered, well, we'll just say contested data at absolute best. For the most part, only a small portion of people were actually doing anything I would consider wrong, though, when I got down there. It actually was, if you take it as a percentage, they were mostly peaceful, but that doesn't really tell you everything. Because, I mean, if 95% of people are being peaceful and 5% are not, well, that's a problem still. And of course, once nightfall came, then it was no longer mostly peaceful. So yeah, at first it was mostly just people shouting and going crazy over various narratives. You know, BLM, fight fascism by calling everything you don't agree with out as fascism, everyone we don't like is racist, various virtue signaling, ACAB, the usual, and just kind of chanting it over and over and over and over again. And so I started talking politics with some of these people, and while not really letting on that I'm in the libertarian right square of things. And what I discovered was something that I had suspected was the case for a long time, but I guess I never really understood just how bad it was until actually facing some of these people, some of the more craziest leftists you can possibly find, and actually talking to them in a setting where they didn't know that they weren't talking to someone who was, just as brainwashed as they are. You see, to make a long story short, these people truly have absolutely no idea what it is that people on the right actually believe. They also have no idea just how varied right-wing ideologies can be. I ran into multiple people who, for example, unironically believe that the entire Republican Party is fascist. And when you pretend to agree with them on these things, a lot of far leftists will admit to some insane beliefs. For instance, one young woman told me that all white people should be forcibly sterilized by the government in order to end systemic racism. I am not kidding. I really wish I was making this up, that this is something that she seemed to truly unironically believe as I was talking to her, and I just kind of nodded my head. It's like, oh yeah, sure. Well, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, whoa there. I'll be moving on now. It's the kind of insanity you would normally think only exists on troll Twitter accounts, where you see someone post something like that and you're like, oh, they're not really being serious. But apparently these people really do exist in real life. Now, fortunately, I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of people on the left are not this crazy, but unfortunately, some of them really are this crazy. A few other gems I remember was one guy asked about minarchism. He didn't know what it was, so I told him it was on the Libertarian right, and that it was about minimal government. And he immediately said, oh, that's just crypto-fascism. Libertarian right is just more fascists. Really now. An ideology about minimum government is somehow secretly an ideology about maximum government because it's not left-leaning enough. This is, again, how they seem to unironically think. The level of ignorance was so off the charts, I had trouble maintaining a straight face because a part of me wanted to just laugh, and another part of me just kind of wanted to leave and go home and go to bed and just forget that I had spoken to absolute madness. I also tried mentioning WikiLeaks. I recall a young college girl thought that WikiLeaks was owned by Donald Trump. Yes, really, she actually believed that WikiLeaks was owned by Donald Trump. Secretly, of course. And that he paid Assange to hack Hillary Clinton's emails, and that's how he got them. No, really, this is... I'm serious, this is what she actually seemed to think, that WikiLeaks is owned by Donald Trump. Yeah, I'm not kidding, some of them really are this ignorant. And this is when I started to realize just how poor the average leftist's understanding of anything conservative or right-leaning really is, or really anything outside of what the mainstream leftist media tells them. They truly have absolutely no idea what's really going on in the world. Or at least they think they have an idea, but they're of course getting a very skewed and very biased spin on the narrative that makes them come up with these really crazy things that clearly aren't true. And so they don't really know what anyone on the right side of the political spectrum, or even just the average conservative, actually believes. And an absolutely insane number of them think it means not liking brown people, or some equally stupid straw man, like, oh yes, of course, being right-wing just means that you don't like black people. Yeah, no, that has nothing to do with being right-wing. In fact, you can believe that and be left-wing, and it's completely arbitrary. But unfortunately, a huge number of them unironically believe this, and they also go through this kind of my way or the highway kind of politics, where there is their own politics, and anything to the right of their politics is just automatically bigotry, full stop, no questions asked. I don't believe most people are actually dumb enough to say that unironically. Most people, if you ask them, do you think a racist is just anyone to the right of your beliefs? And most people would probably hear that and think, oh no, that's crazy talk. But I think on a subconscious level, after meeting with these people and talking with these people, that's kind of what they really seem to think like. They just think that anyone to the right of them is just a turbo bigot, and it's kind of sad. They also aren't very well informed on the Black Lives Matter section of their protest either. They don't really understand the statistics behind it. For instance, a lot of people don't actually know that cops kill more white people than black people. Now, of course, when you go by percentage of population, they kill more black people. But a lot of people down there really don't seem to know what the numbers actually are. For instance, I asked one of them, hey, how many of X people do you think cops killed last year? And they gave wildly inaccurate numbers, something like, oh, there's a genocide, they've killed 30,000 black people last year. Well, no, the number's more closer to 300. Now, that's not good either. It's not good that cops are killing people at all when they're unarmed, but still, it kind of gives you the idea that these people have a very skewed understanding of what's really going on. But that's actually what the statistics are, and yet they don't know this. Like, they really don't understand the data behind their own protest. It's kind of insane. One thing I absolutely definitely did not do is I did not tell any of them that when you control for things like poverty or crime rate, then it actually ends up completely going away, as in there's basically no difference between white and black people being killed by cops at all when you control for those variables. That I did not bother telling them, so I instead just probed them to ask them what they thought the statistics actually were while pretending to not know myself. None of them gave any numbers or data that was even remotely correct. And come nightfall, when it started becoming more of a riot and people started throwing firecrackers and stuff all over the place at a federal building, this all manifested itself as a very big issue. These people don't really understand what it is they were protesting. Well, they think they understand for sure, but they really don't. After all, how can a person understand what ideology they are complaining about if they are completely clueless as to what that ideology even entails? How can you protest fascism if you don't know what fascism is? And I found that to be sadder than anything else that was going on. The plywood over businesses to prevent people from breaking windows, the just random stuff being thrown everywhere, the people being the blatant attempts and provoking a harsh response. All of these were present, but pale in comparison to the reality that these protests and riots that resulted from them were accomplishing absolutely nothing. They were going absolutely nowhere. I mean, they think they were going somewhere, they think they were making a show against fascism, but they weren't. In fact, if anything, they seemed to accomplish the exact opposite of what many people downtown wanted to accomplish. Their actions really, if you think about it, only ended up serving as an excuse for the neoliberal establishment to retain control, with Ted Wheeler even going down to support the protests. And yet, somehow, these people who believe whatever the establishment tells them have convinced themselves that wrecking their own city while virtue signaling at the top of their lungs about various virtues that have been programmed into them by the establishment, it's somehow anti-establishment. And yet they agree with everything the establishment tells them. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people don't seem to really get that. This extreme delusion is a far bigger tragedy than anything else. If there was actually some sense or some logical consistency behind their actions beyond just this everything remotely right-wing is literally heat lore mentality, I could at least see a light at the end of the tunnel, but there was no such thing, and there was no such attempt to have any real dialogue. Like, even when pretending to be left-wing, if I even gave a hint that I wasn't as left-wing as them, I could tell that they started to get really uneasy about it. It was like a sudden uncomfortableness. There was some kind of glitch, like, oh no, someone might not agree with me, literally heat lore. That's really how they think. So here these people were protesting fascism, but of course they have no idea what fascism is, so how can they protest it? How can they possibly accomplish anything other than just serving as useful idiot provocateurs and controlled opposition for those in charge? And that's another big tragedy. They really are just controlled opposition. I've kind of pointed this out before with my video on libertarian socialism, how they kind of claim to be libertarian, but ultimately what they want ends up just giving the establishment more power, under the guise that, oh, we'll make everything more equal if you give us more power. But of course that doesn't happen. The government doesn't do that. They just use their power however they see fit, and thus the libertarian socialists just end up being useful idiots. And that's kind of how I see Antifa. Their heart is in the right place. A lot of them really do want things to be better and more equal for people. They just don't know how to get it. They just don't understand. They're just not smart enough to understand that they're being used as puppets for the state. They just don't get it. And a huge number of them really don't get it because a lot of them I talk to don't really like the First and Second Amendment and would like to see a reduction or total abolishment, unaware that the point of those two rights is to defend all other constitutional rights, or really just defend anything at all. If you don't have the right to self-defense and you don't have the right to speech, then you really don't have rights. Period. Because without those two rights, anyone can just take the other rights away. So of course, there are authoritarians in Congress who are absolutely salivating at the prospect of reducing the First and Second Amendment. And again, these people are protesting, having no idea that what they want would ultimately just give the state more power, and the state would just abuse it in ways that they wouldn't want, because of course, The big problem with useful idiots is that they think that they will be the ones in charge once their ideas are put into practice, but of course that's not how it is. It's just going to be some bureaucrat, so ultimately it'll be someone else in charge. So obviously they can't accomplish jack squat with this mentality, unless you count damaging random business and tarnishing the reputation of Portland, Oregon as a relatively chill city, killing the Portlandia dream. No, really, Portland was actually a pretty sweet place in the 90s and even early 2000s. It's really only when they started shifting more and more towards identity politics, rather than just general liberalism, that things started to really go sour. And I've seen that a lot. A lot of the big problem with the whole social justice crowd is that they take identity politics to a cartoonish level where suddenly the only type of oppression that matters is if it's collective oppression, and the oppression of the individual no longer matters to them. And I see this a lot as well on places filled with leftists online. And so you might be wondering by now, if you've been listening up to this point, what exactly does all of this have to do with Adam Something? Well, quite a lot actually. You see, the general cluelessness from leftists on regards to what the right side of the political spectrum actually believes, leaves a lot of these progressives open to a very blatant and very intellectually dishonest grift, which is telling them exactly what they want to hear. Right-wing libertarians? Secretly fascist. Conservatives in academia? Clearly the only thing they have to offer must be the quote, brown people bad, since a 15-year-old edgelord spamming the N-word on /poll is a really heckin' valid representation of all right-wing philosophy. Except obviously it's not, and those of us who've actually read conservative-leaning books and actually have looked into philosophy of things like this and actually understand that the right and the left is a collection of hundreds of different ideologies, we of course know that that's completely insane. But to these people who don't know anything at all, this grift is extremely effective. It's very easy to trick these people into just thinking that the ideas they don't agree with are some simplified, cartoonist, racist insanity, which of course is not reality. Or at least, this is the kind of intellectually bankrupt strawman that Adam Something appears to be unironically selling to these people. And sadly, they fall for it. The grift operates by telling them that the people who disagree with them are ontologically evil or whatever, bad guys trademark, which of course carries the implication that they are the good guys trademark, just like their Marvel movies. And so the misinformation content that breadtubers like Adam makes perfectly takes advantage of this infantile form of thinking that they have. He can effectively sell them the most absurd version of right-leaning ideology, and they will buy it and believe that it's valid because they have never taken the time to actually read any right-leaning philosophy or theory. Like, they've never read Ayn Rand, they've never read Thomas Hobbes, they've never read Hans Hermann Hoppe, and heck, a lot of them probably don't even know that right-wing philosophy even exists. They might not even know that Thomas Hobbes was considered right-wing. They don't really know anything. And those are just some basic names that many people have probably heard of. There's hundreds more. So their understanding of right-wing seems to primarily come from maybe occasionally watching Fox News at best, but certainly not the more reasonable NTD News or anything else. And so when people like Adam Something make a video conflating right-wing ideology, or right libertarian ideology, with a bunch of nonsense from a clown like Richard Spencer, coupled with some pure flat-out made-up bullshit, the progressives completely buy the BS without question because they just flat-out don't know any better. And it's really sad because ultimately, what gets harmed is the city itself. That's really what's going on. They just damage their own city for no real reason, throwing a temper tantrum over ideologies that they don't understand. You see these businesses all forced to board up, put plywood everywhere, and you've got people suffering with homeless people in their tents everywhere. And many of those businesses were struggling to profit already, and many of those homeless people were already having problems well before all these riots started. And it's just sad. I'm sitting on the Max train going by and just seeing all these places boarded up and everything, and it just looks like some crazy third world country, which is amazing because the Pacific Northwest is absolutely beautiful. If you've ever actually been here, it's one of the nicest places you can possibly be in terms of nature and the places around you. There's a lot of great hiking spots, there's a lot of great waterfalls to go, there's Mount Hood, there's Mount St. Helens, there's a lot of good stuff out here. And honestly, Portland, Oregon itself is, before all this madness started, pretty nice. And then all of a sudden, just in the span of a few years, people just completely lost their minds and turned what was a nice city into, well, what you see here. Some of the stuff I'm going to be showing for the video of this is actually footage I took myself. This is actually me taking footage of downtown. It's pretty crazy. And so when I watch content like Adam Something and breadtubers spreading just blatant misinformation that only seeks to widen the divide between the right and left, just what they're really doing is they're making it impossible to have any honest dialogue. How can the left and the right talk about anything if the left is constantly being gaslit and constantly being brainwashed into believing that anything right-wing is automatically fascist? Well, the answer is they really can't. I mean, how can you talk to a left-winger about free market or economics at all if they immediately assume that that somehow means something racist? Ah yes, we want to have a free market. Oh my god, that's racist! I mean, how can you talk to someone like that? What do you even say? The conversation is already over before it has even begun. When it comes down to it, they know less than nothing about what you believe. And you have to ask yourself, well, what does less than nothing mean? Well, knowing less than nothing, it means your preconceived notions are so incorrect that you effectively cannot learn. For instance, someone who goes into a subject knowing absolutely nothing would usually just accept any knowledge they receive about that subject and then just learn it and go about it as normal. But what if someone comes into a subject with a bunch of preconceived ideas that they refuse to let go of that are completely wrong, and they just refuse to accept any facts in regard to that subject? Well, what's going to happen is they're not going to learn, which means that they would be better off going into it as a total blank slate. And that's what I see in a lot of the libertarian socialists that are making a mess of things in downtown Portland. They basically know less than nothing about conservatism, and so you can't really talk to them about anything, really. And it's sad. But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say in regards to this. After that, I just kind of headed home. I didn't really go downtown ever again after that. I mean, I've gone once afterwards, but that was just 5 months ago. And things have unfortunately actually died down quite a bit. Things are kind of slowly starting to recover, mainly because Orange Man is gone, so I guess they're a little bit happier. But that doesn't really change the fact that this kind of grift that people like Adam Something are perpetuating is still a huge problem, and I still see a lot of people falling for it, and hopefully when my next BreadTuber video is done, I'll have a pretty good way of identifying this type of grift so that it can be more easily called out for the delusional insanity that it is. So anyway, that's all for this. Thanks for watching, feel free to like, subscribe, and other than that, have a good day. Till next time.